What's going on, guys? This is Tower number 9, and I'm coming to you with another Star Wars Unlimited video. This is actually a league match between myself playing Cunning Sabine and Drosan playing a aggression Tarkin. And yeah, we'll see how this goes. So I've talked earlier about how I think that Tarkin has some difficulties or problems. Um, so earlier we've seen earlier we've seen how some of the ramp Tarkin builds sometimes don't quite get there, and the ramp is maybe not as effective for him as it is in a Vader deck. But Drosan has a very different style of Tarkin, very different style of Tarkin gameplay here, and we will see it in action. I lead off with a Rebel, a Green Squadron A-Wing. My opponent plays a tie and puts an experience on it. I take the initiative. I did use Sabine's ability there. The reason that I did that was I was pretty confident my opponent was going to use Tarkin's ability to put an experience on the tie. So in this situation, one thing that I can actually do is I can use the snapshot reflexes to kill the tie, or I could use it to just hit the base directly while also making him spend another resource on the tie to potentially get me. Of course, if he does that, he could kill this unit without it getting a chance to, or without it being able to actually defeat the tie on the rebound there. So I end up using the snapshot reflexes to clear out the tie while keeping the A-Wing alive. Um, would be better to have a shoot first in that situation, considerably better actually. But snapshot reflexes is okay too. My opponent plays a fifth brother. I'm going to play another A-Wing. My opponent takes the initiative, and I'm going to use Sabine's ability, 1 damage to each base. Drawing it up. Surprise Strike is a pretty important card for this style of deck. You don't really want to resource it. Um, I think in this situation, I might end up actually resourcing the Surprise Strike, but if I do, I think it's probably a mistake, and I should resource the Metal Ceremony instead. Surprise Strike is just like a really critical card. So my opponent uses Tarkin Town to defeat the wounded A-Wing. That's why the shoot first would have been a lot better in that situation. It would have let me clear out that tie, not taking damage, and then not be a target for Tarkin Town. I'm gonna bring out a Fleet Lieutenant and have him attack with that A-Wing into the enemy base. My opponent puts the Fallen Lightsaber there on the fifth brother, and then uses Tarkin's ability. So he's very strong now. If I deploy Sabine, the fifth brother is really buffed and can actually defeat her in one shot. If I don't deploy Sabine, then I'm missing out on some important value. I think I end up passing here, and my opponent actually attacks the base here instead of the fleet lieutenant, but does damage to him with the abilities there. I then deploy Sabine and hit the base for 3. And then I Metal Ceremony, which will buff Sabine and buff the A-Wing. But I think keeping that Metal Ceremony was probably wrong. I think that what I should have done in that situation was kept the other Surprise Strike instead of the Metal Ceremony. Because if you think about what the Metal Ceremony is doing here, really all it's doing is +1/+1 on the A-Wing. And to be fair, that's not terrible. It does get it out of range of the Imperial Interceptor. But Sabine being on 6 health matters in some cases, but it's not really going to matter against this guy who can defeat her in one shot easily. Um, Although he could also just push a bunch of damage to the base. The base is getting pretty low. My opponent on 11 life, or has taken 11 damage. I have taken 10, but my opponent hits for another 8. So another attack from that guy could win the game at this point. Yeah, and this is why I think it would have been good to keep the other surprise strikes. So I have here 2 units that can attack for 4, so that would be 8 damage. That would put my opponent on 19. If I have 2 surprise strikes, then that is another 6 damage, which is 25, and that's a game win. But because I don't have the other surprise strike, what I end up doing here is actually surprise striking that I actually end up surprise striking the fifth brother with Sabine. And the reason for that is simply that I'm going to lose the game if I don't get him off the field. And so I have to attack there. If I had, or you know what? Sorry, I wouldn't have actually won that turn. Never mind. Because if I had not, if I had kept the surprise strike, I would not have had the medal ceremony, so I would have been off by two. I still think I probably should have kept the surprise strike, but I don't think it's as straightforward as, I don't think it's quite as straightforward as I was thinking there. In general, though, that's a very valuable card for this sort of build. All right, so here I'm in a kind of desperate spot. My opponent has an experienced short trooper who can attack and destroy the base in one attack. I lead off by using Tarkin on him, but my opponent's quite ahead at this point, and I think it's not going to go my way. So we see a forced choke clearing those guys out. I erroneously bring them back to hand there, I think, instead of discarding them. Is that right? Or maybe I discarded but had another one in hand. Snapshot reflexes into the base. And now it is basically over and I concede. So I'm not sure what happened with the Fighters for Freedom there. I might have taken them to hand accidentally, but ultimately was a loss there. Ended up not quite getting enough damage through. So this sort of deck is one that can actually, so this is also a fast deck. The Tarkin aggression build here is actually also a fast deck and is one where early engagements are actually pretty relevant. I accidentally took my opponent's sideboard into my hand. So I'm giving, or my opponent hadn't taken the sideboard, so when I spawned mine and they stacked on top of each other, so I'm giving those sideboard cards back. Interesting to see that resupply is a sideboard card for my opponent. I actually think that's a good idea. So I'm doing some sideboarding of my own, so I'm taking out these medal ceremonies right now. Arguably, I should keep those. It's kind of hard to say. I think I put my shoot firsts into the deck. Shoot first is it's an interesting card. It's quite relevant in these situations where you have early engagements between uh, units in fast decks where you want to try and stop them before they can cause a bunch of trouble. So in that situation, for instance, having a shoot first instead of a snapshot reflexes would have put me at a substantial advantage in the early game because it would have meant that my A-Wing could have cleared out that experienced tie without being himself killed by Tarkin. So like that one swap would probably be worth, that would probably be worth, 3 to 9 damage in the depending on how quickly my opponent stopped the A-Wing after that. But that's a considerable amount of damage and might have actually been a game win if I'd had the more efficient way to deal with that buffed opponent, but didn't have it that time. So I'm going to play Sabine, Explosives Expert. My opponent plays a basic tie. I use Sabine's ability for 1 damage to each base. Opponent buffs the tie. I'm going to take the initiative. So this is an interesting hand. So I really have two main routes here. So one thing that I can do is I have 3 resources this turn, so I could do Greedo and Surprise Strike or Greedo and Snapshot Reflexes and miss a resource. The other main option being to play the Falcon. One advantage of playing the Falcon is that it can deal with my opponent's experienced tie pretty easily, and so my opponent hits me here. One thing that I could have done in the previous game but didn't is I could have used Jeddah City on the opponent's buffed tie in order to remove its attack and make it so that my A-Wing would be able to clear it while remaining undamaged. In retrospect, that probably would have been a good idea. I was trying to save it for a later time, but I think against Tarkin it would have been worth it to just preserve the life total. So here my opponent plays a Stormtrooper. I play the Falcon. My opponent has my opponent puts a buff on that trooper there. I have the Falcon clear out the tie. My opponent takes the initiative, and I pass. So again, I could have used Jeddah City there on the tie, made it so that it couldn't do damage, and then I would be in a position where I would be able to leave the Falcon in play and not be at risk from Tarkin Town. As it stands, I might have to withdraw the Falcon. Alternatively, of course, I can just leave it in play, but I do end up deciding to withdraw it to get it out of range of Tarkin Town, which I do think is actually pretty bad. I think it would have been better for me to use Jeddah City to remove the potential threat there, though I could be wrong. My opponent has a buffed trooper and trades that trooper for Sabine, so both boards are clear now. Both bases have taken 5 damage. I do get to deploy Sabine this turn, which is nice. So one thing that I can do, yeah, one thing that I can do this turn is I could do Lothal Insurgent, Greedo, and Snapshot Reflexes. I deploy Sabine, and she's immediately removed by Forced Choke, which is not what I want to see. Um, I'm going to spend 3 for the Falcon. My opponent takes the initiative, and then I just attack the base for 3, not even using the Snapshot Reflexes on the Falcon, but that way I get to deploy Greedo as well. So ultimately, I think that turn could have been much better for me. I think it would have been better for me to use Jeddah City to prevent having to withdraw the Falcon to get out of range of Tarkin Town. I think that that would then allow me to have a significantly stronger board. Now, I do get to play the Falcon and still attack, but imagine if I had had 3 more resources that turn. So let's say I could have instead attacked with the Falcon with the Snapshot Reflexes for another point of damage, had a tougher Falcon for the future, and deployed the Lothal Insurgent as well. I think that would have been probably better. So now we have the Falcon and Greedo staring down Tarkin and a seasoned shore trooper. Tarkin deploys onto the field. So in this situation, what I'm really trying to do is just get that damage to the enemy base. I have a surprise strike. I have a snapshot reflexes. I have a Lothal insurgent. I end up surprise striking the base with Greedo. That's going to be 6 damage. So that's a big chunk of damage. And then I can either play snapshot reflexes on the Falcon or play out the Lothal insurgent here. Tarkin hits Greedo. Greedo hits the top deck with a snapshot reflexes. So Tarkin takes 3, and I think I put the other damage on that trooper. Enemy base at 15. Another hit brings it to 18. So we're now in position where a surprise strike can win the game. Not immediately, but a surprise strike can put me into a pretty good spot. My opponent could conceivably have a barrage here. A barrage from a strength 3 trooper there would deal 5 damage, which would not be enough to remove both these units. However, if my opponent waited to play it until the next turn, when that trooper will get +2, then it would actually be enough to kill both these units. Lothal Insurgent does a random discard, gets a Snow Trooper Lieutenant, I believe. And then, so we are now at 18 damage on the enemy base, 7 life left. I have 16 life left. So I'm very ahead when it comes to that, but we'll see what my opponent does here and what the overall situation will be. My opponent ends up just taking the initiative here. Um, I'm happy to see no cards get played this turn by my opponent, but it does mean to me there might be a barrage coming. I opt to withdraw the Falcon to dodge a potential barrage. My opponent could, of course, still play it, but I think this could be structured so that it will be less efficient. And I could potentially open fire and kill Tarkin. I can potentially, open fire and kill that trooper. Also, killing the trooper would remove the barrage unit So my opponent has Tarkin. Yeah, so Tarkin defeats the local insurgent. I open fire on the trooper. So now there isn't a good unit with my opponent to play barrage with. I could my opponent I think passes. I use Sabine's ability. Then I'm gonna play the Falcon. And then I think my opponent, yeah, removes the Falcon here with an open fire. I'm gonna take the initiative. So 20 life to or 20 damage versus 11 damage. I've done a lot of damage to the enemy base here, but my opponent does currently have the initiative. I'm not sure why I resource that instead of something else. I'm going to do a Spark of Rebellion here. I get to see the opponent's hand. So this is actually a very scary hand. We have Barrage, we have Palpatine, we have an Interceptor, and we have General Veers. Those are so in particular, my opponent has three different removal cards with Barrage, Palpatine, and the Interceptor. Next turn is going to be 8 resources. 8 resources means Palpatine. I end up deciding that I'm going to remove Palpatine because it's probably the biggest threat of those units. I know now that my opponent has an interceptor, which means that potentially the partisan insurgent that I have in hand is going to be low impact. Um, but we're going to have to see how this goes. So I play out the partisan insurgent here. One advantage is that he has high health. 4 health unit is going to be more difficult to remove than some of this other stuff. My opponent attacks my base for 2 while buffing Veers. I'm going to use Sabine's ability, so I'm really slow rolling this in the hopes that my opponent will play something or pass or whatever. And my opponent does play out the Imperial Interceptor now. And so if I had kept that Fleet Lieutenant instead of resourcing it, I could just take the initiative right now and almost certainly win the game by doing Fleet Lieutenant with my partisan insurgent, hit the base for 3, and then use Sabine's ability for lethal. My opponent would probably not be able to push damage to my base fast enough. However, I got rid of that Fleet Lieutenant, which is now looking like a serious error. One thing that I could do is I could play out the Fang Fighter that I have in hand. I end up just taking the initiative anyway. If I draw a surprise strike, I can use that to win. I do not draw a surprise strike, but I do draw a fleet lieutenant. So my error in resourcing is compensated for by me drawing the same card. So Fleet Lieutenant sends the partisan insurgent into the base for 3, and now all I have to do is use Sabine's ability and win the game. There is a chance that my opponent will have the Colonel Yularen to heal 1 and get out of range, in which case I think I lose. I think my opponent has lethal this turn if I don't have some answer like that, but luckily for me, he does not, so I win this one. I arguably didn't deserve to win that with resourcing that fleet lieutenant and then putting myself in a very awkward spot. But I ultimately had the lucky top deck that did allow me to take that game. So we're now 1-1, and we're going to move into round 3 to see who can win this set. So I am going to look at my sideboard again. There is an argument that I should put in the third Disabling Fangfighter. The Disabling Fangfighter here is an interesting card because Tarkin generates so much experience, and I did see that Fallen Lightsaber earlier. So there is at least one card that's a good target, plus the built-in. There's at least one card that's a good target, plus the built-in effect from the experience that Tarkin can deliver. So once again, my opponent leads off with a tie, and I'm going to lead off with Sabine Wren. Experience used to buff the tie. This is looking very familiar. So I could take the initiative here. I could use Sabine's ability here, or I could take the initiative. The advantage of taking the initiative is that if my opponent has some removal thing that's going to get rid of my Sabine Wren, then it doesn't get a chance to go off. So I end up taking the initiative and swinging Sabine in for 3. Arguably, though, it might have been better for me to allow my opponent to have the initiative in order to better slow roll, but we'll have to see. So my opponent here plays General Veers. I'm going to use Sabine for 1 damage to each base. My opponent's tie is now a 4-3, so swings into the base for 4. I play the Falcon, and my opponent takes the initiative. This time, I remember to use Jeddah City and have the Falcon clear out the tie. So that is going to leave my Falcon still alive and in a position where it cannot be hit by Tarkin Town. Now, unfortunately, Veers can easily clear out Sabine here, which isn't great for me. But I do have the Falcon now as the kind of uncontested unit in space. Do have to pay one for it, of course. Um, if my opponent does not kill Sabine, I can potentially shoot first with her to kill Veers. So here we have an interesting situation. I could shoot first with Sabine the unit to hit that Royal Guard for 4, but the problem is it wouldn't actually kill it because the Royal Guard has the +1/+1 from Tarkin and or from General Veers and is actually a 4/5, which is a very major obstacle at this time. So I think, however, I do have Sabine Wren, the leader, in my hand. So one thing I can potentially do is have Sabine, the unit, hit the Royal Guard, and then finish the job with Sabine Wren, the leader, potentially using that shoot first to prevent Sabine, the leader, from taking a bunch of damage. So I have Sabine, the unit, hit the Royal Guard for 2, 1 damage there to the 1 damage there to the base. But the problem with this is that my opponent just puts an experience on the Royal Guard, who now has 6 life. And because of that, uh, there's still 4 life remaining, and Sabine, the leader, is not going to be able to defeat the Royal Guard, even with the shoot first. So in this situation, I think I made a significant error by not putting the damage with Sabine Wren's ability on the Royal Guard. If I had put the damage on the Royal Guard, I would then be able to deploy Sabine Wren here, use shoot first to clear the Royal Guard, and be in an advantageous position. But because I did do that, Sabine here is going to have very low impact, and I actually just don't even deploy her. I put out an Alliance X-Wing instead, and this is really not where I want to be. I uh, I could, however, have deployed Sabine and used shoot first to deal with the Royal Guard anyway, but Sabine herself would be defeated, and I don't really think it's worth it. So we see an open fire played on the Falcon. Luckily, I do have another Falcon in hand, so it's not necessarily going to outright remove it. The Alliance X-Wing swings in, doing some damage. Another buff with Tarkin, this time on Veers. I play out the second Falcon. My opponent deploys Tarkin. Second Falcon hits the base for 3. So the problem here is I'm actually not going to win this race. Um, and I think I actually erroneously take 1 less damage than I should there because that should be +1 with Tarkin. But yeah, I'm not actually winning this race. So I deploy Sabine, but Veers hits my base for 4, and I'm just not really close to winning this game, and I've essentially lost the race in the ground arena. And so the crucial error in that one was that I was assuming I didn't account for the possibility of a HP buff on that Royal Guard from Tarkin's ability, and so I thought deploying Sabine and using the shoot first would be able to clear that Royal Guard, and I put the 1 damage from Sabine and Explosives Expert's ability on the base instead of on the Royal Guard. This game looks very different if last turn I get to deploy Sabine Wren, use shoot first to clear the Royal Guard while doing 1 damage to the base. And then we're going into this turn with that guard not on the field and Sabine, the leader, deployed, who my opponent would then have to deal with by some other method. I think in that situation, I would actually be pretty favored moving into this endgame. But because I mismanaged that 1 damage, we end up with a situation where the opponent sort of takes control of the game. I also think that it probably would have been good to at least to deploy Sabine earlier. Maybe I could have used the surprise strike to clear out the Royal Guard and just push that damage that way. But one way or another, I ended up not being able to deal with that situation in the ground arena and getting outraced by those units. Veers is not an efficient unit in terms of his own stats, but if he can stick around and buff other units, he becomes a big problem, and that's kind of what we saw in this game. So yeah, there's a set of 3 games between Cunning Sabine and in my opinion, much better Tarkin deck than some of the ones that I've been seeing. This aggression Tarkin with much more of an early game focus was a lot more credible, in my opinion, than the kind of really heavy ramp focused Tarkins, which often just seem like they would be better as Vader decks. So I thought this was an interesting set, ultimately a victory for Drosan. So congratulations to Drosan for winning the 2 out of 3 here and winning this league match. If you're interested in participating in the league myself, I'm going to have a link down in the video description below, so you can check that out. And yeah, I believe I will also have a link to my current Cunning Sabine deck list, which might be a little different from the one in this video. I'm not sure. Not sure. But thanks to you guys for watching, and we will be back later with some more Star Wars Unlimited content. I will catch you guys later.